In a small seaside town where the nights smelled of salt and the streets shimmered with yellow lamps, there lived a boy named Aaron who sold paper moons. He wasn't a magician, though the children swore he must be, nor was he a merchant in the ordinary sense. He was just a boy of 17 with ink-stained fingers, a box of handmade moons, and eyes that always looked like they were searching for something far away. Every evening, when the first stars appeared, Aaron wheeled his small wooden cart into the marketplace. On it hung dozens of glowing paper moons, delicate circles painted with silver dust, tied to strings of thread. Each one shimmered faintly, catching the moonlight that fell from the real sky. The sign on his cart read, in faded blue letters, "Buy a moon and dream a little." People laughed when they passed him the first time. Dreams for sale? And made of paper? They'd say, but children were curious, and lovers were sentimental. So, night after night, they came back. A little girl would buy a moon and hang it above her bed. A lonely man would keep one on his desk. And somehow, each claimed they slept better after holding it. Aaron never explained how they glowed. He just smiled and said, they shine brighter when someone believes. No one knew much about him. Some said he was an orphan from the hill villages. Others whispered he once lived by the sea with his mother, who taught him how to paint the sky. But those were only stories. What was true was this: he never missed a night, even when the rain poured, even when the wind scattered dust through the streets. Aaron stood by his cart, eyes fixed on the horizon. One night, as the market was closing and lamps flickered in the wind, a girl in a white shawl stopped by his stall. She looked like she had walked far, her sandals wet with rain, her hair curling against her cheeks. "How much for one moon?" she asked softly. Aaron smiled. "Depends on what kind of dream you need." She laughed a little. "I just need one that doesn't fade." He looked at her for a moment, long enough to notice that her eyes were tired, the kind of tiredness that came from crying. Then he reached into his box and took out a small moon tied with a blue ribbon. It shimmered more brightly than the rest. "This one doesn't fade," he said. "How much?" "Nothing," he said. "Just promise to keep it close on cloudy nights." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Lila," she said almost shyly. "Aaron," he replied. That night, she walked away holding the moon close to her chest. And for the first time in years, Aaron watched someone leave not as a customer, but as if a part of him had followed them. From that night onward, Lila returned. Sometimes she'd buy another moon. Sometimes she'd just stand there talking about the city she came from, the father she lost, the art school she wanted to attend but couldn't. Aaron listened, rarely speaking. He had learned long ago that silence carried more comfort than words, but after every conversation, he'd add a new moon to his cart, softer, brighter, as if her voice itself brought them to life. And somewhere between the selling and the listening, the boy who sold moons began to dream again. The following evenings, the marketplace began to notice something unusual. The boy who sold moons was no longer alone. Every night, just before the clock tower struck 7, Lila appeared. Sometimes she brought a basket of bread or a thermos of tea. Other times she carried her sketchbook. She'd sit on the edge of Aaron's cart while he sold his glowing moons, her eyes shining with the same soft light. No one knew what bound them, the quiet boy and the girl with the gentle voice, but together, they made the square feel less lonely. Lila was new to the town. Her father had passed away 2 years ago, and she'd come to live with her aunt who owned a small bakery near the harbor. She spent her mornings kneading dough and her evenings wandering, sketching faces, rooftops, and the restless sea. She'd always dreamed of studying art, but life, as it often does, had other plans. The bakery needed help, bills needed paying, so she painted only in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. The first night she met Aaron, she hadn't planned to stop. She'd simply been walking home through the drizzle, lost in her thoughts. But then she'd seen that faint silver glow, a row of tiny moons swaying in the breeze. Like stars that had come down to rest. Something about that scene had felt like a memory. Soft, unexplainable. Now, weeks later, it had become her routine. Do they really glow on their own? She asked him one night, holding a paper moon close. Or is there a trick? Aaron smiled, not looking up. There's a secret. Tell me. He shook his head. Secrets lose their magic when spoken. Lila leaned against the cart, watching him work. His hands moved with a calm rhythm, cutting, painting, tying threads like a ritual. You make them yourself, don't you? Every one of them. They're beautiful, she said softly. Aaron looked at her then, really looked. You think so? I do, she smiled. They remind me that not everything bright has to come from electricity. He laughed quietly. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my moons. Over the weeks, they began sharing small stories. Aaron spoke little about himself, only that he'd once lived near the cliffs, where his mother taught him to paint the night sky. She used to tell him that the moon carried forgotten dreams, the ones people wished for and then forgot. When she passed, he said one evening, I tried to paint her a moon bright enough to reach her, but it never shone. Then I realized, maybe light isn't something you paint. Maybe it's something you share. Lila listened, eyes glistening. That's what you do now, isn't it? Share her light? Maybe, he said quietly. She didn't ask more. Some stories didn't need questions, only presence. As spring turned into summer, the marketplace grew busier. Sailors returned, traders filled the square, and children begged for paper moons. Aaron's cart became a little landmark of its own, the moon seller, as everyone called it, and though Lila often helped him, wrapping the moons, tying ribbons, sketching little stars on the boxes, she never asked for payment. Instead, every night before leaving, she'd draw a small symbol on his cart with chalk, a star, a feather, a heart. Depending on her mood, you'll wake up to it, she'd say. A new dream each morning. Aaron began to look forward to those symbols more than anything else. One evening, when the sea breeze carried the scent of rain, Lila arrived looking different. Her hair was tied up, and she carried a rolled-up canvas under her arm. I finished something, she said, eyes sparkling. Want to see? He nodded. She unrolled the canvas on his cart. It was a painting of the marketplace, the cobblestone street, the flickering lamps, the people wandering, but at the center stood a boy and a girl, surrounded by a dozen glowing moons. He stared, speechless. It's us, she said softly. The way I see this place. And you. Aaron's throat tightened. He'd never been painted before, never seen himself through someone else's eyes. It's beautiful, he whispered. You made the light look real. She smiled. It is real. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the air between them changed. The sound of waves faded, the laughter of the crowd softened. For a moment, they were the only two people in the world. Then Lila looked away, shyly rolling up her canvas. I should go, she said, her cheeks warm. My aunt will be waiting. Lila. She turned. He hesitated, then held out one of his brightest moons, a round one tied with a red thread. For you, he said, to paint by. She took it with both hands, smiling. Thank you, moon seller. And that night, when she walked home with the moon glowing in her hands, people turned to look, wondering if she carried a piece of the sky itself. But somewhere, deep inside him, Aaron felt something shift. He'd sold thousands of moons, but this one, the one he'd just given away, felt different. As if he'd given away more than a light, as if he'd given away a part of himself. Summer melted into a softer season. The wind carried warmth by day and whispers by night, and the town, once noisy with merchants, now moved at a slower rhythm, as though everyone had fallen under some gentle spell, and perhaps they had, because ever since the girl with the white shawl began visiting the moon cellar, the whole marketplace seemed a little brighter. Aaron's cart stood near the old clock tower as always, its wooden frame covered in small silver moons. But now, each one was slightly different, painted with new shades, stitched with tiny threads of gold. If someone had looked closely, they might have noticed that every moon bore a small hidden letter, etched faintly near its edge. Lila never saw it. She only felt the glow. That summer, they spent nearly every evening together. Sometimes she painted beside him, her brush tracing the crowd's movements and light strokes of color. Sometimes he told her about the sky, the names of constellations, the way the moon changed its face each month. He taught her to make paper moons, 2 dot at first. Her hands trembled, folding the thin rice paper wrong. She laughed at her own clumsy shapes. But soon, under his patient eyes, she learned the rhythm, the slow fold, the twist of thread, the careful press of silver dust. You see, he said once, watching her hold a finished moon, it's not about how perfect it looks. It's about how much of your heart you hide inside it. She smiled. Then mine will glow brighter than yours. He laughed, a sound rare and soft. We'll see. Their evenings became small worlds of their own. Children would stop by just to listen to their banter, and sometimes when the streets emptied, Lila would hum a tune while Aaron folded moons in silence. One night she asked him, Do you ever wish for yourself? You sell dreams to everyone else, but what about you? He paused, the silver dust on his fingers catching the light. I used to, he said quietly. When I was younger, I wished for things, for my mother to stay, for the storms to stop, for someone to stay by my side. And now, he looked up at her. Now I just make sure others can wish instead. She studied him for a moment, her eyes soft. It's lonely, Aaron. He shrugged lightly, smiling. The moon's lonely too, but it still shines. One evening, Lila arrived early, excitement sparkling in her voice. I have news, she said. A traveling art school is holding an exhibition in the city next month. If my painting gets chosen, I might get a scholarship. Aaron's heart lifted and sank at the same time. That's wonderful, he said, forcing a smile. You'll finally get your chance. But I'm scared, she admitted. What if I'm not good enough? He took a small, half-finished moon from the cart and placed it in her hand. Take this, he said. When you paint, let it hang nearby. It'll remind you who you are. She looked at the fragile thing glowing softly against her palm. You believe in me that much? He nodded. More than you believe in yourself? The night before her submission, it rained heavily. The market was empty except for them. The lamps flickered, and the air smelled of wet earth. Lila stood under the awning, drenched and laughing. You shouldn't be here, she called to him. The rain will ruin your moons. Aaron only smiled. Let them get wet. Maybe they'll learn how to shine through storms. She stepped closer, droplets falling from her hair. You talk like the moon listens to you. Maybe it does. Lightning flashed behind them, a bright silver tear in the sky. For a moment, the world went still. Then she whispered, almost, without meaning to, when I'm gone, will you miss me? The words hung between them, trembling like rain on glass. Aaron looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, he wanted to say everything he'd never dared to. How she'd turned his lonely nights into starlight. How her laughter had become his favorite sound. But he only said, softly, every night. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Then I'll send you a moon from the city. He nodded. And I'll wait for it. The next morning, she left for the city, her bag filled with brushes, colors, and the small paper moon he'd made for her. Aaron returned to his cart that evening, the same as always. But something was missing. The silence between the lamps seemed deeper, the air heavier. Still, he opened his box and began folding. The moons that night glowed dimmer, but he didn't stop. Every fold, every thread, every whisper of silver dust, it was his way of holding on. Days turned into weeks. The townspeople noticed that Aaron's moons had changed. They were brighter, almost painfully so, as if he was pouring all his longing into them. Children would ask, why do your moons glow so much now? He would smile faintly and say, because someone believed they could. But when he was alone, he'd look up at the real moon and whisper, did she see it? Did she remember? And far away in a city full of lights, Lila would sit by her window, holding the small paper moon he had given her. It had lost its silver dust, faded from the journey, and yet, every time she painted, she swore it shimmered faintly in the dark dot. It was the same light that had once shone between them, fragile, handmade, and eternal. The city was nothing like the seaside town Lila had left behind. It was brighter, louder, faster, a place where dreams walked on crowded streets, always half a step ahead of those chasing them. Neon lights shimmered on glass windows, cars hummed like restless bees, and the sky above was a pale blur, washed out by the city's own brilliance. No stars, no moonlight, just artificial glow. Lila missed the sound of the ocean. She missed the warmth of the bakery and the laughter of the townsfolk. But more than anything, she missed that quiet corner by the clock tower, and the boy who folded silver dreams with his bare hands. Her painting, The Moon Cellar, had been accepted into the exhibition. It stood at the center of the gallery, a depiction of Aaron's cart glowing under the night sky, surrounded by children holding their own paper moons. The judges praised its emotion. The audience loved its story. People asked, who is he? This boy in your painting? Lila only smiled and said, someone who taught me how to believe in light. Her name spread through art circles faster than she ever imagined. Within weeks, she received an offer, a scholarship to study in the capital, an artist's dream come true. And yet, the night she got the letter, she sat on her apartment floor and cried because for the first time, she realized that success can also sound like silence. She tried writing to Aaron. The first letter began with, You wouldn't believe what happened, and ended in a half-drawn moon. She wrote another, I hope you're still selling moons, and another, do they still glow like before? But she never sent them. The city had a way of swallowing intentions. Days blurred into deadlines, nights into exhaustion. Still, every evening, before she went to sleep, she hung the small paper moon he'd given her above her bed. It no longer glowed as it once did, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It reminded her of something purer, a kind of happiness that didn't need applause. Back in the seaside town, the marketplace grew quieter. The bakery closed earlier now that Lila was gone. The old clock tower chimed the same melody each evening, echoing through empty cobblestones. Aaron still came every night, setting up his cart as he always had. But the people noticed he was changing. His smile was gentler, but his eyes had begun to fade. He still painted his moons, still tied them with ribbons, but now he made fewer. Sometimes he'd stand for hours just staring at the sky, as though waiting for something the world had forgotten to deliver. One late evening, when the market was nearly deserted, a sailor stopped by his cart. Do you still sell those? The man asked, nodding toward the glowing moons. Yes, Aaron said softly. They're for anyone who believes in them. The sailor laughed. Belief doesn't pay rent, boy. Maybe not, Aaron said, but it keeps the night from feeling empty. The man shrugged and walked away. Aaron watched him disappear down the street, then looked up at the real moon. It was hidden behind clouds, and for the first time in years, he wondered if his light was fading too. Weeks passed, the weather turned colder. The sea grew restless, waves crashing harder against the docks. One evening, a small boy came running to his cart, clutching a newspaper. Look, the boy said excitedly, pointing at a page. It was an article about an art exhibition in the city. At the center was a photograph of a painting, The Moon Cellar. Below it, in bold letters, rising artist Lila Morton brings hope and light through her art. Aaron stared at it for a long moment, his chest tightening. There she was, smiling faintly beside the canvas that held his image. He didn't feel anger or jealousy, just a deep, quiet ache, the kind that came when something you'd given freely had found a world beyond you. She made it, he whispered. The boy grinned. She's famous now. Yes, Aaron said softly. She always had the light in her. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by his small window, the waves echoing faintly beyond the hills, and thought about the moon, how it never truly vanished, only changed its shape. Maybe people were like that too. He took out his paintbrush, dipped it in silver, and began painting one last moon. But this time, instead of leaving it blank, he painted a girl inside it, sitting by the sea, holding a tiny glowing circle in her hands. When he finished, he whispered, "For you, Lila, wherever you are." Then he placed it gently on his cart. Though no one came to buy it, it stayed there for weeks, untouched, gathering dust, waiting for a buyer who would never come. In the city, Lila began to feel something missing from her success, something small but vital. Every gallery, every applause, every newspaper headline, they all felt hollow when she stood beneath the city's lightless sky. One evening, while walking home after a long day, she stopped by a street vendor selling lanterns. They glowed beautifully, but none of them felt real. None of them carried warmth. Then she looked up and saw the moon, faint, pale, struggling to pierce through the smoke. Her heart ached. She whispered, "Aaron, I kept your moon. It still glows a little." And that night, she made a decision. The next morning, she packed her bags. The city without stars had taught her how to paint light, but the boy by the sea had taught her how to feel it. And she realized that the difference between the two was the distance between success and peace. The road back to the seaside town felt longer than Lila remembered. The train wound its way through the countryside, past rust-colored fields, quiet villages, and bridges that looked half asleep beneath the weight of years. She sat by the window, holding a small paper moon in her lap, the same one Aaron had given her on that rainy night so long ago. It no longer glowed. Its edges were frayed and the ribbon had faded from blue to gray. But when she turned it in her hands, she could still see faint traces of silver dust, tiny flecks that shimmered when the light touched them. She smiled through tears. "It still remembers you," she whispered. When she reached the town, it was dusk. The air smelled of sea salt and baked bread. The cobblestone streets were the same, though a little emptier. The sound of the waves rolled through the alleyways like a lullaby she had forgotten she knew. But when she reached the square where the old clock tower stood and children once chased pigeons, her breath caught. The moon cart was still there, Dot. It stood under the same lamplight. A little older now, its paint peeling, its wheels crooked. A few paper moons hung from its edges, swaying softly in the wind, but there was no sign of Aaron. Lila stood by the cart for a long time. The marketplace was closing, and vendors were packing up, glancing curiously at the stranger who stood staring at the empty moon stall. Finally, she asked a fruit seller nearby, "The boy who sold the paper moons, is he still here?" The man looked at her with recognition. "Ah, you mean Aaron. Haven't seen him for months now. He stopped coming one evening and never returned." Lila's heart stilled. "Never?" The man shook his head. "Left this cart with a note tied to it. Nobody could read it. It was just a drawing, I think. Some say he went to the cliffs. Others say he took a ship north. Quiet boy. Never spoke much." "Where's the note?" she asked quickly. The man nodded toward the cart. "Still there, I think, tied to one of the moons." Lila's hands trembled as she stepped closer. Sure enough, a small piece of parchment fluttered from a silver thread. She untied it gently and unfolded it. It wasn't words, It was a painting. A girl sitting by the ocean under a paper moon. The same moon she held in her hands now, and at the bottom, written in faint ink, were 5 small words, "For when the real one fades." Her tears fell silently onto the note. The sea breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and memory. He was gone, but he had left her the moon. That night, Lila stayed in the small inn by the shore. She couldn't sleep. She walked to the window and stared at the horizon where the waves melted into the darkness. The sky was cloudy. The real moon was nowhere to be seen. She took out the old paper moon and set it on the windowsill. For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer. "Please," she said softly, "let it shine. Just once more." The wind rustled through the trees. The waves crashed against the rocks. And then, so faintly she almost thought she imagined it, the moon began to glow, not bright like before. Just a soft silver pulse, a heartbeat. Lila smiled through her tears. "You're still here," she whispered. "You always are." The next morning, she went to the cliffs beyond the town, the place where the sky met the sea, where the world seemed to end and begin again. She climbed the path slowly, her heart heavy yet hopeful. Near the top, She found a small wooden box nestled between two rocks. It was covered in sea dust, but still intact. She opened it. Inside were paintbrushes, tiny jars of silver pigment, and a folded parchment. She unfolded it, and her breath caught. It was a letter. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where the moonlight goes when no one is watching. I don't know if the world will remember the boy who sold moons, but I hope someone remembers how they made people feel. Every moon I painted was a wish I couldn't say aloud. Every ribbon was a piece of a dream I didn't have the courage to keep. But one night, a girl came and asked for a moon that doesn't fade. And for the first time, I believed it might be possible. So I painted my last one for her. If she ever comes back, tell her she was the only real light I ever knew. And tell her, the moons never really fade. They just wait for someone to believe again. Lila pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing quietly. The sea wind howled around her, but the cliffs felt alive with his presence. The boy who had turned dreams into light. The boy who had given her the courage to chase her own. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were parting. Slowly, the moon emerged. Full, bright, silver. It bathed her in light, spilling over the cliffs, the sea, the town below. And for a moment, she swore she could see him, standing by the edge of the water, smiling faintly, his cart behind him, glowing softly in the distance. She blinked, and he was gone. But the light remained. That night, she walked back into town and reopened his cart. She polished it, painted over the peeling wood, and lit each of the remaining moons with tiny candles. When dawn came, people passing by stopped to stare. A new sign hung from the cart, written in delicate silver paint. The moon seller's light, kept alive by the girl who believed. From then on, Lila spent every evening by the cart, handing out the glowing moons to anyone who needed them. Children, wanderers, dreamers, lonely hearts. And each time she gave one away, she whispered the same words Arin once told her. They shine brighter when someone believes. The town came alive again. The bakery reopened. The marketplace buzzed with laughter. And on clear nights, if you stood by the sea, you could still see the glow of the moons, small, delicate lights dancing like stars fallen to earth. And some swore that every now and then, when the tide was high and the night was still, a boy's shadow could be seen walking along the shore, his hand brushing the sky, leaving trails of silver where his fingers passed. Years drifted by like gentle waves against the shore. The seaside town changed, but somehow it still breathed with the same rhythm, the hum of the tides, the chatter of the marketplace, the golden scent of freshly baked bread in the morning. And there, under the same old lamppost where the story began, stood the moon cart. Only now, it belonged to her. Lila had grown older, but her eyes still held the quiet wonder that once drew her to Aaron's stall. She no longer wore ribbons in her hair, yet her hands still trembled slightly each evening as she lit the tiny silver moons, one by one. Children gathered around her every night. They would point, whisper, and giggle as she lifted a glowing moon from the cart and said, softly, each of these moons carries a dream someone once believed in. Maybe one of them is yours. And she would give it away, freely, always with a smile. No one knew where the light inside the paper moons came from anymore. There were no batteries, no wires, no secret mechanisms. Some thought it was phosphorus. Some said it was magic, but those who believed, truly believed, swore that the glow pulsed gently like a heartbeat, as if the moons were alive, The townspeople began to call her the Lady of the Silver Cart, and every year, when the moon was at its fullest, she held a festival on the pier, the Night of 1,000 Moons. People from other towns would come, carrying small notes or whispered wishes. They'd trade stories, songs, and laughter. At the end of the night, they would release the glowing paper moons into the sea. The waves would carry them away, and for hours the ocean shimmered as if it were covered in stars. One evening, during the festival's 10th year, a young boy approached Lila's stall. He was no older than 12, with curious eyes and paint stains on his fingers. "Miss," he said shyly, "where do these moons come from? Did you make them?" Lila smiled. "No, child. Someone else did long ago." The boy tilted his head. "Who?" She looked up at the sky, where the moon hung low and full, casting its silver light over the sea. "A boy who sold dreams," she said softly. "He painted light into people's lives." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "Did you love him?" Her lips trembled with a sad smile. "Yes, but more than that, I believed in him." The boy nodded solemnly, as if understanding something far greater than his years. He hesitated, then asked, "Will he ever come back?" Lila looked at the waves glimmering in the distance. "He never left." That night, after the crowd had gone and the sea had quieted, Lila stayed behind. The moonlight stretched across the water like a path, silver and endless. She took out the very first moon Aaron had given her. Its paper was fragile now, its glow faint, yet it still carried warmth when she held it close. She sat by the edge of the pier and whispered, "It's been a long time, Aaron. I did what you asked. I made sure the moons never faded." The wind brushed her hair. The waves sighed against the wooden posts. And somewhere between the hush of the sea and the whisper of the stars, she thought she heard a voice, soft and familiar. "You did more than that, Lila. You gave them light." Her eyes filled with tears. She smiled faintly and looked up above her. The sky seemed brighter than it had in years. Thousands of stars shimmered together, and in the center of them all, the moon glowed with a strange, living brilliance. For the first time in her life, she realized something. The light of the moon wasn't cold. It was warm, like the light of a heart that never stopped shining. A few weeks later, the townspeople found her, asleep by the shore, her hands folded around the paper moon. They said she looked peaceful, like someone dreaming. That night, something extraordinary happened. When the tide came in, it lifted the moon cart gently from the shore and carried it into the sea. The waves didn't crush it, they carried it. Slowly, carefully, until it disappeared beyond the horizon. The people gathered in silence, watching. And as they did, hundreds of glowing moons rose from the water, drifting into the sky one by one. They floated upward, joining the stars, and from that night on, the moon above the town shone a little. Brighter, soft, silver, and alive with a heartbeat that no one could quite explain. Years later, travelers passing through the seaside town would still hear the story of the boy who sold moons, and the girl who made them eternal. Some said the light of the moon was their love, preserved forever. Others said it was hope, that as long as someone believed, even paper could glow brighter than the stars. But those who stood by the water long enough on the calmest nights sometimes swore they saw them, two figures walking hand in hand along the silver waves, their reflections dancing in the tide dot. The boy carried a lantern shaped like a moon. The girl laughed softly beside him, and together they disappeared into the horizon, where the light never fades.